Talking about coming here and performing like that, but do Australian bands, do you think they need to come here to be, do you need to see it? Do you need to feel it? I mean, you can see something online, it sounds great, but how important is it for them to be here, live and in the flesh, on stage? What would you say?
I think if there's interest, it's good to be here, to come here on your own, because then everybody can, once one label's kind of interested, like a bunch of others will follow, it's kind of like a small circuit, and I know I tell other labels, I tell other lawyers, I think the more the merrier, and it helps my case. If I'm interested in a band, I want every other label there too, just because that's more ammunition for my label to actually be interested. So if you have interest from somebody, I think it's definitely worth to come here if you can. If you have the means, it'd be great.
Sure.
And having a good show here, that's playing, the right venues here is really good too. Yeah.
And it shows that you have your resources together. You're motivated enough and you're smart enough, you're savvy enough to be able to come here and tour and figure out a way financially to do it and hustle and make it happen. Because at the end of the day, that's the key. You're just going to stay in Australia, like my Australian office will just look at it. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about breaking in the States, it's same thing with UK bands. I mean, we see a lot of UK bands that are great in England, but it's not until they really understand the sort of time commitment that you have to make in this country to barely make a dent. It's overwhelming. It's got to be a lot for Australian or British bands to realize, because it's just different. It's massive.
Sure. Well, since you guys in one form or another are all sort of connected to a large parent company, so whether it's through your Interscope affiliation or Warner through Atlantic or Universal, what about do you interface with those companies regularly, and is it an advantage or disadvantage or helpful possibly to see, hey, there's a band on Warner Australia that we might want to pick up, or Universal? Is that something that is, how does that play into your decision making, and how does that factor in?
I definitely did that a lot at Capitol, because now I'm trying to focus more on my own indie label thing. But
so when you were at Capitol,
when I was at Capitol, I was jumping at the chance to get Empire of the Sun on Capitol, instead of going through, what was it? Astroworks. Yeah, I was like, please, we need to, get this on Capitol, and it didn't happen, but I was definitely actually trying to, and I was working with Craig Hawker, who was the guy, that was working with the band in Australia. So I definitely check in with him even still now, because he's always on top of everything that moves in Australia.
Sure.
So, even though I'm at Atlantic now, I still, check in, hey, have you heard this Australian band? What's the scoop on them?
Sure.
On a monthly kind of basis.
And say for deals, are U.S. labels like Sony US, would they be less inclined deal-wise to want to do a deal with, say, a Sony Australia band, or?
No, I mean, I think the challenge when you're in a major label system, I mean, usually the starting question is what kind of a deal do you have already, and if it's a worldwide deal, then you have to sell the affiliates on working with you. The challenge in those situations, and you see it time and again, also with American bands trying to get releases in other territories, is that the incentive structure within most of the major label systems to work something that's from the sister company, it's hard. You only get 20 cents on the dollar or whatever. And, the first priority ends up being the stuff that's just ridiculously big and that has to be a success everywhere. So in the Universal system, first it's Lady Gaga, and then you've got, your local priorities. And then beyond that, as you get down the food chain, it's pretty hard to get a foreign affiliate to zealously work a band that's had middling success in their home territory, or even upper middling success in their home territory. So in some cases, if you can retain the flexibility to do split territory deals and you can sign just for your territory, then you can kind of go to indies in other territories, and sometimes they'll do a better job with it. I mean, Glassnode's made an amazing business out of basically doing split territory deals, and they've done amazingly with Mumford & Sons, and Mumford's not big enough in the UK for the mainline labels at Universal to really run with it in the US, or at least it wasn't when it came over.
Sure.
So there is an advantage to trying to retain some flexibility, or at least having a deal where you've got sort of a release commitment. If that release commitment isn't met, by your sort of major label, then you can go look for someone to license to in that territory. And it's tough, though. I mean, that's another thing where good management comes in, because I think most artists in most territories have a hard time figuring out where to go in other territories. I mean, that's true of American artists in Europe and Australia and whatnot. It's like, well, who is there to talk to? And so having someone who has at least some international experience in your camp, who can tell you, well, here are some cool indie labels and these other places to go reach out to, I think that's really valuable, because it is, and it takes some real coordination too, because things aren't going to get released at the same time, and you've got to tour when there's actually music out, but you also have to tour in that other territory, and just keeping all the sort of like web of things going in coordination with each other is like a real task and takes some skill.
So just because you're signed to a major in Australia doesn't mean that you're going to get picked up here.
No, I think in some ways you have to just try to work it as if you weren't, and try to get them into it.
So there are examples like Silverchair or Missy Higgins, or artists that have done well at their parent label, and then they get picked up by the local affiliates. But you still have to kind of do your work and prove something.
Yeah, and I think especially now, you're swimming against the grain a little bit, unless you're one of the overwhelming priorities. So you gotta kind of entice people.
Sure. What about if you're signed to an Australian publisher?
Sorry, my pen just exploded. If you're signed to an Australian publisher, as far as doing a deal,
in another territory, is it all case by case, or is there a standard?
I just see the trend now that a lot of artists do deals that are Australia, New Zealand, and then exclude the rest of the world, and then talk about it later. There are rare exceptions where they do a worldwide deal. It really depends what our Australian office would want to do, but some deals come to us where, hey, they're signed to the Australian company. Are you interested in picking it up for the rest of the world? We do see a lot of deals like that, but a lot of them seem to be Australia, New Zealand at first, and then they separate out. I see a lot of managers and attorneys doing that now, and they do territory by territory for publishing deals, because you are talking about a massive company too. I mean, a worldwide publishing company, and you want somebody who's really into your music. And I may love it, but what about the person in England? And when you're talking about film and TV, especially, well, like the value added of a major music publishing company, you want everybody to be excited about it.
Does a company like Universal sign for the world, say in Australia? If you're an Australian artist and
some of them do sign for the world. Like Wolfmother was a good example. It was signed for the world. So.
And then it's up to the regional affiliates to work them.
Yeah, I mean, if we had our deals, we'd assume we'd want everybody to sign a worldwide deal, because it's more rights. We're able to control more, especially from a film and TV perspective. If you're pitching something, and especially with TV now, they try to get world perpetuity sort of rights. They try to get the biggest bundle of rights possible. And if you have certain territories excluded, it's more difficult to clear that song. Like a supervisor doesn't want to come back to you in 6 months and try to clear something for a certain territory, and you don't have it, and it has to go to another publisher. It's a nightmare.
Sure.
So.
Well, we're talking about publishers and labels. So, let me ask you this: you're sort of neutral here. You're not representing one kind of entity or anything. But do you need a label?
Depends who you are. It really depends on what kind of artist you are. I think.
Can you make it here without a label?
I think it's common. I mean, I think the question is less. What is a label at this point?
Okay.
That there are.
It's a good question. What is a label?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain types of artists that still benefit from the sort of mass radio work that the major labels are traditionally better at than anyone else. There are certain artists where I don't know if that's as much of an event, and some of the trade-offs that you might have to make to get that deal in terms of 360 participations in touring or publishing or merchandise may not be justified by what the end result could be if just you left the label to its devices. I mean, honestly, if you're just a jam band, signing a 360 deal is kind of an odd choice unless you really think that you can take that run at radio. And so in that case, maybe you look for an indie that can put out your music, or maybe you try to do it yourself up to a certain point. I mean, it's hard.
So that's a label.
Well, no, I mean you could. I mean,
Well, I'm
a
saying, what if
label's a sticker. A label's a sticker on a record.
Right.
Now, what's behind that is the deeper question of just sort of resources. And I mean, I think that on the most basic level, a third-party label relationship is a bank and an ad agency. How big a bank and how good an ad agency depends on who you're talking to and how interested they are.
Would you agree with that?
I think regardless of the size of the label, if the people are going to kill for you and die for you, if they're that passionate about you as an act, whether it's a major, and I think it's more rare on the majors that they're like that, or if you're hell yeah, and I know you get so passionate about your artist, that's priceless, to have passion like that behind it. It's usually, in my opinion, the smaller people like us who nurture the artists and then upstream them. So I think that's kind of the best of both worlds, to be with somebody who will start out and do the development that's imperative and necessary, and then have the resources of the Warner Music System or Universal to propel it.
But say I'm that band that's sort of got that. I'm getting a life online. Like, people are reacting. I got it up on iTunes myself. I printed it up myself. I'm selling it on my website. Maybe I got some sort of CD Baby or independent distributor. Do I still need a label?
If you're comfortable with just the money you're making with that, then no. But if
So
you want to
so what would you could make a living doing that, right?
yeah, you could. It depends on what kind of
If you're a DJ, you don't necessarily
Yeah.
need a label.
Yeah,
You're making all your
exactly.
money touring and the
Yeah,
fees,
Girl
and
Talk,
you're making
yeah,
huge
he
money.
makes- Yeah, but if you want to be, a
You're a
artist
radio
that's on the radio
Yeah.
and on, a national, international scale, I think you still need some support of a big.
As much stuff that's changed in the U.S. market, like radio is still the same. Radio is still
Yeah.
the best way to break your act.
Totally.
And I think it's interesting also. I mean, in the major labels, maybe in the last, probably the last 5 to 7 years, there have been certain artist stories where, I think there was a point in history where if you could sell 100,000 records on an indie label, if the major label signed you, you could add a zero to that. You find now that there's certain artists where there's still a multiplier going to a bigger label. There's certain artists where you sell the same 100,000 records, but much more has been spent to do that. And, I think you're seeing in some cases there have been artists like Interpol, who was on Capitol,
Yeah.
who sort of was on Matador,
Yeah.
went to Capitol, went back to Matador.
Yeah.
Now, I think I applaud the majors for trying to be adventurous in signing acts that would otherwise live on a Sub Pop or a Merge or a Matador or more of an indie rock label. But I think if you're the artist, you have to ask yourself, where's my lane, where's my niche, and be honest with yourself, where's my ceiling potentially?
Yeah.
And can I get to that place with this size partner, or do I need that size partner? And maybe you don't jump straight there. I mean, I think most of the time, the majors like to find something that's a little bit of the cottage industry already. And sometimes that does take a good independent label to help you get there. And again, it depends what sort of genre you live in. I mean, a certain type of artist benefits massively from having Sub Pop seal approval.
Yeah.
Sure.
Totally.
So there's a credibility factor. There's an association, the brand, basically.
Yeah. Like the Feint, there's always that one wild card where the Feint would never sign to a major label, but yet I don't know how much bigger they would be if they did sign with a major label though. But they're just content at being, on their
Some artists
Saddle
become
Creek.
self-destructive after a certain
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
So it's
totally.
you find where the ceiling is. Right?
Yeah.